Frank Abagnale has it all. He spends Christmas regaling the story of how he won over his wife to their son, by charming Paula in the dance hall of her tiny French village with nothing but his American uniform. Recently, he was granted the high honor of permanent member to the New Rochelle Rotary Club, a feat achieved by only 57 other men since the group's inception in 1919. But there's a bit of a hiccup. The IRS is out for blood, and they're coming for Frank Sr. Frank takes his son out of school for a day to show him how a good man in a corrupt world works the system. There's the imply flattery through a necklace bribe, the recruit a young man to be your driver gambit, and the classic, I admit I made a mistake, but it was really the crooked accountant bit. And while Frank Sr. gets rejected for a loan at every bank in town, he did sell the car for $500 more than it was worth, so he's the one getting ahead here. The Abagnales are forced to move from their large, idyllic home to a frankly still fairly spacious apartment. For his son's birthday, Frank Sr. gifts Frank Jr. $25 and a checking account from one of the institutions that shot him down.
From this day on, you're in that little club. I'm in that little club.
Meanwhile, Paula's having a hard time with her new circumstances. She starts an affair with Dad's friend, Chuck Barnes from the club, and one day after school, Frank Jr. comes home to a lawyer asking him to choose between his parents. Who does he want to live with after the divorce? And thus begins our boy's penchant for running away the minute shit gets real. Frankie takes a train to New York, but $25 isn't enough to keep checks from bouncing. He tries his hand at forgery, but the banks don't give money to people they don't know, even when Frank Jr. employs his father's foolproof grifting techniques. And then our little runaway gets overwhelmed at the sight of an airline pilot. People respect him, kids look up to him, and air stewardesses laugh at his creepy jokes.
What do you think, Angelo? The tomatoes are ripe this afternoon.
The money, the power, the status. Frank writes his father that he's applying to be a pilot, and then stages an interview with a Pan Am guy who, disarmed by the curiosity of his high school journalist, hands out a fair number of company secrets. Through trial and error, the young Abagnale moves from personal to payroll checks, and soon realizes that he can deadhead his way across the country. Where his father's necklace trick failed in street clothes, Frank Jr. finds it more successful in the sexy glow of a pilot's uniform. Frank flirts his way across the states, but eventually returns to the East Coast to take his father out to a fancy restaurant with chilled forks. The boy offers his dad a caddy, but he must refuse. The IRS is still on his ass. And then a competition of lies ensues. The son projects an image of wealth and stability, while the father conveys a game of cat and mouse with the government, one where he'll get them in the end. He's not the mouse who drowned. He's the mouse who turned the cream into butter. And then Frankie asks about his mother, to which Frank Sr. responds,
Don't worry, I'm not gonna let it go without a fight.
Carl Hanratty and his less than enthusiastic colleagues from the FBI's bank fraud department start sniffing around LA, zeroing in on a paper hanger who's been rerouting fraudulent checks all across the country. Hanratty breaks into a hotel room where a young man introduces himself as Barry Allen of the Secret Service. Barry explains that Carl is too late, that he and his team have already picked up their paper hanger. And though Hanratty is suspicious, the Flash maintains his cool long enough to make off with the Micker machine and a handful of blank checks. Emboldened by his nickname in print media, the James Bond of the sky picks up a recreation of Sean Connery's suit under the alias of Ian Fleming and hustles a former pinup girl turned lady of the night with the highbrow check version of the quick change scam.
See, this check is for $1,400. We agreed upon $1,000.
Why don't I give you back $400 and you give me that check?
Barry Allen of the Secret Service calls up Carl, I work in a large dark room on Christmas Eve, Hanratty, to exchange pleasantries and give up his location. In the spirit of the holiday season, Carl lets him go just this once and wishes his family good tidings and cheer.
You didn't call just to apologize, did you?
What do you mean?
You have no one else to call. Oh.
Eventually, Frank Jr. tires of playing mother hen to his gaggle of party kids and sets his sight on anxiety incarnate Brenda. A superior at work yells at her for being an inexperienced little idiot, but Frankie manages to calm her down by praising her ability to read a chart. They flirt over braces, and Dr. Connors, a Harvard graduate and former employee of the Southern California Children's Hospital, decides to take a job in Podunk, Georgia as an emergency room staff supervisor. Frank spends his stint at the hospital macking with Brenda in his large, intimidating office, taking roll call because he's still school-aged and not familiar with clock punching, and using his position of authority to hide the fact that he don't know shit about medicine. Frank and Brenda move things to the bedroom, where she admits that she had an abortion a few years ago and that her parents kicked her out of the house. Instead of shaming her for being a whore, Frank coddles his girl and asks,
What if you were engaged to a doctor?
Brenda takes Dr. Connors to meet her Lutheran parents, where her father, the Louisiana lawyer, gets suspicious. Details about that snake Hollingsworth at Berkeley are pretty muddy, and why would a young man of such professional distinction want anything to do with their disgraced little girl? Already entangled in a web of lies, Frank Jr. chooses the truth for once, that he's not a doctor or lawyer or an airline pilot.
I'm just a kid who's in love with your daughter.
Dr. Connors manages to pass the Louisiana bar and starts working for Brenda's father as an assistant prosecutor. And despite struggling through Has Anybody Here Seen Kelly during TV time, Frank has finally found what his heart most desires, a happy family. He watches his fiance's parents wash dishes. After all these years, they're still very much in love. But something's not quite right. Their joy is a constant reminder that the happy home life of the Abagnales didn't last. Frank Jr. flies out east to find his father wearing a postman's garb at this bar decked out in fairy lights, tinsel, and holiday wreaths. The son comes in all excited. He has 2 first-class flights to his wedding. Money and status aren't an issue anymore. His parents can finally be reunited. The father counters with, "Your mother won't look at me. She's married to my former friend. And BT dubs, the United States government is on your ass and will be for the rest of your life." And even though Frank Sr. still thinks he can worm his way out of his little tax problem with a lawsuit against the IRS, at least here he's trying to have an honest conversation with his son. But what is Frankie's response to the truth? He fucks right the hell off. Having identified his paper hanger through Paola's missing child report and divining the kid's whereabouts from his father's stack of mail, Hanratty and team ambush the young lover's wedding, setting Frank right back on his running track. After some shenanigans at Miami International, the Skyway man makes his way to Europe and expands his scamming to international markets. Forever on his tail, Hanratty and crew work out that Frank is printing real checks in his mother's hometown of Montlichat. Carl goes to confront the kid he's been pursuing for like 6 years, and Frank is pleased as punch to see him. They get to uphold their tradition of chatting on Christmas. Hanratty implores his long-term project to turn himself in. The French are pissed livid that the notorious paper hanger has been running around on their turf stealing their money. They've sent 24 police officers and are prepared to take him out if he doesn't submit himself peacefully. Abagnale doesn't believe a word of it. He's been using the false pretense of authority to get away with his manipulations, however short-lived they've been. There's no reason to believe Carl's telling the truth here. The man wears a wedding ring despite being a divorcee with a semi-estranged daughter. But death is a cold, definitive ending. Is it worth the risk and the off chance that Carl has some professional integrity and is telling the truth? All of the lies surrounding Frank have everything to do with the myth and pursuit of status. He faces rejection in his schemes until he assumes the facades of professional, trustworthy men. Supposedly his father achieved a permanent high standing with his lifetime induction to the New Rochelle Rotary Club, but we don't see any of those guys helping out Frank Sr. when the family's finances collapse. Even Paula jumped ship. And Brenda's family, it's very clear that the Louisiana lawyer loves his daughter, but he disowns her due to the stigma that an abortion brings. Conversely, he accepts her back when she returns with the ultimate social boon, a successful Lutheran man. If he genuinely felt a way about abortion, Brenda's father would have never accepted her back. And the fact of the matter is, they still took her calls during her period of exile. Brenda's parents always loved and cared about her, but they allowed the expectations of their prestigious social standing to dictate how they treated their daughter. But Carl, he loves his job more than anything. It's implied he abandoned his family for his profession, as illustrated by the sad office Christmases. And it's not like he gets along with his colleagues. Most of them think he's too boring or too serious.
Oh, would you like to hear me tell a joke?
Yeah, we'd love to hear a joke from you.
Knock, knock.
Who's there?
Go fuck yourselves.
While there is social equity to be gained from the story of a happy home life, Carl wears his wedding band when no one's looking. This is a lie primarily for his own personal psychological benefit. A man who tells his colleagues to fuck off is not a man who cares about how others see him. A divorced man who wears his wedding ring in the dark only really cares about how he sees himself. So would Carl really deceive Frank just to get him in cuffs? Hanratty showed Abagnale his true colors during their first Christmas phone call. When Barry Allen gives up his coordinates, Carl refuses to hunt him down because he thinks the kid is lying. He doesn't want to send out agents and have it be a blight on his record. Carl only pursues Frank when he thinks he has legitimate cause and resources to do so. No reason to lie when you have all the power. There is a certain tenderness between Hanratty and Abagnale. Carl warns Frank about the scale and escalation of his excess, much in the way of a tutting ant. And though he primarily goes to France to win his collar, Hanratty does his best to protect Frankie from the French authorities, even as the bedraggled criminal wheezes his way to a failed escape attempt. Hanratty extradites Abagnale, and on their flight back to the States, informs the boy of Frank Sr.'s passing. Our paper hanger uses this as fodder to make a run for it yet again, this time through a toilet escape hatch. He flees to where his mother now resides, in the house she shares with the villain Chuck Barnes. Here he meets his sister for the first time. Frankie takes in the devastating tableau of his mother and her new family enjoying a nice Christmas while he gasps and shivers in the cold, dark snow. In her defense, Frank Jr. kinda just disappears from her life. We only ever see him write to his father, and they don't interact after he runs away from home. Despite this, Paula is very willing to pay for her son's youthful indiscretions with the money she makes working part-time at the church. Also, it's not clear if she knew about Frank Sr.'s ongoing tax fraud, but the portrayal of his character would suggest that he hid it from her. Personally, I think that's a valid reason to ditch a motherfucker. Over the course of the film, it's hard to tell if Frank really cares about anyone, or if he's just chasing his fantasies. Take Brenda. Every nice thing he does for her is part of a bigger con. After the doctor yells at her for being incompetent, Frank soothes her anxiety so that he can get privileged information about his friend. He's kind and understanding about her past, and uses his doctor title to win over her father, but he was also getting to the point where he needed to switch careers. Medicine was a pretty risky choice to begin with, especially since he couldn't even stomach a nasty injury. To his credit, his initial interest in Brenda had nothing to do with her social status, although that she is vulnerable makes her an easy target for his manipulations. And he did have a contingency plan in the event that the feds caught up to him. Frank always intended to bring her along for the ride. But does he value Brenda for Brenda, or for the idea of family that she represents? In all fairness, everything he does with her is mutually beneficial to them both, at least in the short run. Frank does do one selfless thing in the film. While in his school's front office, he tells the girl submitting an absent note to fold the paper over to make it seem more like it came from her mom. Looking at Frank Sr., the story about Paula is very much man want pretty girl. He objectifies her as an emblem of success. And Paula does the same. As her husband romantically recounts the story of their love, she accidentally spills some wine and freaks the fuck out because her carpet/status symbol got mildly wrecked. Frank Sr. doesn't care. He just wants to dance with her. In their final meeting at this not even a little bit sad bar, father and son hug it out in a genuine and sincere fashion. Even though their relationship is built on a metric fuckton of lies, the love between them is real. What I'm trying to say is that the happy bullshit Christmas facade is a metaphor for the massive letdown/realization in young adulthood that your family is a complete and utter dumpster fire, yourself included. Anyway, wishing you all a bearable holiday season. Feel free to chase me in the comments. Bye.